remuneration policy, and could I invite to the table Wendell Dakuna and Shamil Sahib to speak to this policy, please.
Good morning. The purpose of the policy is to approve Council's remuneration policy. This is a legal requirement under the Local Government Act of 2002, Schedule 7, Section 36A. The remuneration policy was first accepted in 2014. We have made a few changes, one with reference to the GB Resolution 57 in 2017 regarding the living wage. We have added that as part of our social equity policy in the remuneration policy, and we've added a new principle of contribution that clarifies employees' contribution to the organization strategy as a valued part of the remuneration they receive. We've also clarified the roles and responsibilities of people as part of this policy. It's also to reflect that we've had a merger of two departments and a newly formed People and Performance Department.
Thank you very much. So I will move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Filipaina. Now we'll open that up for questions from our council officers. Are there any questions? Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for your kind words of acknowledgement to Councillor Quacks. I had a few questions, gentlemen. I've read through the report. My questions are firstly around the principle of recognition that we're adding into the policy. Is that part of your performance management system? Is a subset of that, or are they the same thing? I couldn't quite understand the difference between your performance management system and this recognition system. If you could just clarify that for me.
Absolutely. So our high performance framework works on performance management as one pillar, recognition as the second pillar, and REM as the third pillar. So recognition is an essential part of that framework, and we make sure that we use that as one of the tools to inspire and motivate our employees. Okay, thank you.
And is that recognition a measure of input, so you're recognising input of staff into their roles, or is it a measure of output and you're measuring results from those roles?
So we measure the input and output as part of it, necessarily adhering to the behaviours that we have set out as the proper and values that we have in our organisation strategy.
Okay, thank you very much. And in clause 10, it just talks about how it's linked to remuneration. The principle of contribution has a link to remuneration. I just wondered if you could just flesh out for me, is that a direct link in terms of money, reward in terms of remuneration reward to an employee that they get, or is it more indirect link to remuneration?
So remuneration is one part of our recognition framework, and the contribution principle recognizes the fact that only if we can exhibit the right behaviors and the right performance levels should a remuneration change be required for an individual.
So remuneration adjustment, possibly?
Yes.
Yeah. Within a salary band?
Yes, within the salary band.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you very much. And just one final question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to ask you these questions, and thank you for your answers. The mentions about, in the actual policy itself, that we measure ourselves against a certain, after job size to jobs, we benchmark against the median of a certain sector that you've mentioned in here. And it says excludes bonuses in terms of when we're doing that measure. Could you explain to me how the bonus system does work for council employees and who's entitled to those bonuses? Are they lump sum payments of some time, or do bonus schemes actually exist within the organisation?
So we don't have a bonus scheme in Auckland Council.
Yeah, okay, right. All right, that was all. Thank you very much, and thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on this policy? If not, are there any comments on the policy? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to see this, because I think if you're going to drive excellence in an organisation, which we're striving to do, you can't keep driving that and then not rewarding. And I know that there'll be people out there that say we shouldn't reward these staff, but actually we need to have commensurate salaries with the wider community that reflect the experience and expertise of the people that we have to have in our organisation. And we have a huge diverse staff makeup. There's people all right across our organisation with varied levels of experience, education, expertise, but they're all really important. And so I think that what we've got here, it's really obvious, so that hopefully people see why people have the salaries they do, whatever they may be, and that we get away from that criticism that we just fling money at people for no reason, and which is not what we do. And I think it's really a really important part of an organisational culture to make sure that you recognise excellence. And we do have a problem with retaining staff. They're racing off to the provinces. And we want to have a really good culture here where people feel that their efforts are rewarded. That's a really good piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? Councillor Hills? Councillor Holst, sorry.
Thank you.
And then Councillor Hills.
My question is to our Chief Executive. So, given the changes to this policy, and it was very useful having a look at the marked up version, I can see that we've carried much of the same intent through. But following on from Councillor Cooper's point, are we sure that this policy delivers the ability for you as our Chief Executive to lead a team that is made up of excellent staff and to actively recruit talent from the private sector and retain them, given the fact that that's not always the message that we're giving?
Through you, Chair, is that like a parliamentary question?
I'm ready to take supplementary.
I've never been to Parliament, and I have no intention of ever going there. If it means, is that a good question to ask you, then I'll say yes.
Look, I think what we've got to be really free and frank about is that, we are absolutely a market follower, and we respond when we're in trouble. And that means we're so far behind the market, we've got to do something different. So in the planning and the building area, staff are moving to other parts of New Zealand for a different lifestyle choice and more money. And look, that's the marketplace at work. So we've just got to live with that. But we're a follower. We don't do anything in advance of what the market is doing. So, when we negotiate with the PSA around if there is going to be an annual movement, that's all done it's in arrears. It's happened. The measurements are done in March, and we negotiate mid-year, and then we apply that change from September. That reflects our approach with everything we do in remuneration. So yes, we rely on people. If you talk to our staff, generally they will, if you say, why do you work here? They won't say because the salary's really good. They will say, I want to make a difference. I like being in an organisation where I think I'm actually making a difference to what it's like to live and play and work in Auckland. And that's our position, and that's our selling point.
Thank you. That's really encouraging, Mr Mayor, because I think the issue that we face is we are carrying a lot of vacancies and we are competing hard with the private sector. There's also an expectation of a degree of complexity in this world that doesn't necessarily exist in pretty much any other organisation in New Zealand. And I think if we are to be able to look our media and our community fair and square in the eyes and say we're getting best value for money, we understand what that means and that we have to pay for it. And the Lagoimas and the fishing expeditions from the media about how many staff have you got on over 100,000 is a little bit like asking any of us why we live in $1 million houses. We simply do because that's what they're worth out there. Not our fault, that's just simply how it is. And if we think we're going to attract people into some of these senior positions for 45,000, which might have worked in the 70s, we've got another thing coming. I think reading that item in conjunction with the item 12 on the charter, I think whilst we need to be absolutely clear about our drive for efficiencies and transparency, we do not need to transmit out there that this organisation is so cash-strapped that we can only afford to employ people who are either A, incompetent, B, desperate, or C, in the last couple of years leading up to retirement. That's not the staff that we want. And bearing in mind most of us are on $100,000 and it's a part-time job for some, I think we need to be a bit clear about what we're saying in this. And I think we need to do better at cheerleading and supporting our staff actively and warmly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Penny stole most of my lines, so I'll just be quick. Yeah, I just think it's, first of all, it's great to see the living wage entrenched in this document. You know, that was a big policy last year and an important one, showing the worth of our staff and what we think that people deserve working in this organisation. And I just want to echo some of Councillor Hulse's points. I think it's important that this shows the value of our staff. I know the issues we're having in many of the spaces. I know in the regulatory and planning space, you know, we lose people to the private sector because it's just pays so much more, and then often we have to contract those people back for their specialist skills, which probably ends up costing more. I think, you know, it's important to have this sitting here as a backdrop for these staff. Most of the people, in fact, all of the people working here are highly skilled and they're specialists in their areas. We aren't increasing staff numbers by very much, and with the operating budget only going up sort of 1.1, 1.2% a year, it is very difficult to increase staff pay and keep people here with the rising costs of Auckland as well. And the fact, and I'm glad you answered that question before, there are no bonuses, there are no Christmas parties, there are no gifts. There, you know, in the private sector, I know lots of people that work in the private sector who have fantastic Christmas parties and fantastic bonuses and fantastic, you know, gifts and things when people complete, you know, major projects and all sorts of things to help with staff morale, help with productivity, all that. The things that in this organisation that help with staff morale and productivity are working with each other and working in the community and doing all those extra hours our staff do on top. You know, right now we've got tons of staff out working nights and weekends for the Have Your Says and different things, and we know that all our staff will be, you know, will email us on a Sunday on an issue or answer a phone call on a Saturday night if we've got an operational issue that needs to be done. So I think that our staff work well outside their bounds and, you know, really work hard. So I just want to put that out there, and that, you know, they aren't just faceless bureaucrats, and the issues, you know, often need to come back to us, but it's really important that we make sure that our staff know they're valued within the budgets we have as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. I'd just make a few comments about the recommended policy, and I must express a little bit of disappointment that I saw words like the original policy was there to attract, retain and motivate our staff, and that's been replaced with wording more along the lines of feeling valued. And my impression is that we've muddled remuneration policy with performance management policy. Remuneration policy is about what we pay to attract and retain and motivate our staff, and how we reward, recognise staff is about performance management. And I just think they've been blurred in this policy. And, you know, staff are leaving the organisation. I agree with the words of our Chief Executive. You know, they're leaving for lifestyle choices and more money elsewhere around the country. And some of the lifestyle choices actually around their needs to buy a house and have affordable housing. So I think one of the things that we need to look at as councillors in the wider picture, sense of attracting, retaining and keeping staff, is around, you know, how expensive it is to live in Auckland, and Auckland's role that we played in that as Auckland councillors around our policies and our rules, regulations and difficulty to build new affordable homes. So those are my only comments there. Just in summary there, gentlemen, I just felt that my feedback to you is that there's a blurring between the remuneration, which I believe should be around how we attract and retain our staff and motivate them, where this is morphed a little bit more into that policy as well as trying to include the performance management.
Thank you. Can I just draw your attention, Councillor, to Section 2 of this policy, financial responsibility, where it's balancing the need to be financially responsible to our constituents, but also the need to develop and attract talented individuals, and also the policy that relates to contribution, that says the person that does a superb job in delivering on their core requirements deserves to be paid more, reflecting that fact. So I think some of your points are actually picked up in that policy. Councillor Casey.
Oh, I just want to take the opportunity to congratulate the Mayor on the living wage again, and like Councillor Hills, the fact it's actually in our remuneration policy forevermore, at least until it's reviewed. But I just want to remind my colleagues that the cleaners who clean our toilets here in the Town Hall are subcontractors. They don't receive the living wage. And I'll be even happier when we have the next version of the remuneration policy, which adds in extending the living wage to ensure that our subcontractors receive it as well. Thank you for what we've got so far.
Thank you, Councillor. And last one on my list is Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Sue. I like this policy, and I just wanted to reflect on the emerging research on the experiences and feedback of public servants, both here in New Zealand and some of that research from Canada. And the evidence is really clear, sir, that it's not just about remuneration when we're talking about public servants. In fact, most of the research tells us that there are three kind of pillars that a lot of the public servants are reflecting on. They talk about empowering managers, where managers empower them to be part of the group and they feel like they're contributing actively, where there's an ability to see themselves as active participants in the organisation's journey to their mission, and finally the work-life balance. Those are the three pillars that's coming out in the research, and I was pleased to read on page 14 in the valuing of our people that we've got ideas that are premised in this on flexible working where appropriate, the ability to train and develop, and where employees are encouraged to bring their whole self to the workplace. So I'm encouraged by this policy, I'm encouraged by the living wage, and I want to endorse the policy as it stands. And congratulations to those of you who've had a chance to look over it and I guess reflect. You might not have considered the research, but reflect that research in how the policy has been developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I can just add a couple of words to close the debate. I do want to refer all councillors, and particularly Councillor Sayers, to page 14, market positioning and remuneration ranges. Auckland Council needs to balance financial responsibility with the ability to attract and retain quality employees. And retaining and recruiting appropriate talent is critical to this organisation if it is to be a well-functioning, high-performance organisation. So we will never be, as the Chief Executive has said, a market leader. We cannot compete with the private sector, nor should we try to compete with the private sector. And there is a consequence to that, and I saw it at Graham Street when I went down to thank our building consent workers for the superb job they did in working long hours over Christmas to deal with a backlog of consents. and there was a row there of a dozen people working behind computers. They weren't processing building consents. They were new recruits that were being brought into the organisation to replace a flood of people that are exiting because they get offered twice as much in the private sector. That twice as much might be an exaggeration. Significantly more to work in the private sector. And it takes 3 or 4 months at least to bring those building consent workers up to the level that we need. So on one hand you'll hear people saying you're paying your people too much, but if that were the case, we wouldn't have the turnover in some of those core workers that we are getting. We need to pay sufficient wages to our people to have competent people to deliver the services. The second thing I want to say is that the living wage is fantastic. That is part of our social responsibility. I feel very proud of this council actually passing the living wage in this term.
Hear, hear.
The third thing is to acknowledge that those that make a huge effort, should a person that's kind of casual about their approach to work be paid the same as the person who is delivering on a range of things? We use the jargon here, organisation strategy. What does that mean? It means people who make a real effort to engage and enable our communities, to support with quality advice for our elected members, to make things easy for our customers, to get better value for ratepayers and residents. I think it is appropriate in a remuneration policy that the superb workers that go over and above what you'd expect of a normal employee should be acknowledged for that, because we have to reward excellence and we have to reward effort. So I think all of those things are important, but what we are basically doing at all times is finding that balance between being fair to those that fund our organisation, the residents and the ratepayers, and being fair to our employees. But we wouldn't be fair to our ratepayers if we decided we would only employ mediocre people because that's all we wanted to pay. We want the best people in our organisation, and within the constraints that we work under, we will strive to do that. And I want to finish on a final point, is that we don't pay $8 million to a chief executive that loses several $100 million in the last year but still retains his salary, and I'm very glad about that. It's been moved and seconded on that note. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Right, we come